Okay, everyone, I am going to go ahead and get started with some announcements and housekeeping. Good afternoon and welcome to this WIOA Wednesday webinar. My name is Molly Cook with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Our topic today is autism in the workplace, strategies to support individuals with ASD in the workplace. As a reminder, all participants on this call are in listen-only mode and cannot unmute themselves. If you have questions as this webinar proceeds, please post your question in the Q&A or chat boxes, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. A reminder that this webinar will be recorded. The presentation, recording, and any materials presented during today's meeting will be available on the icsps.illinoisstate.edu website and on the Illinois WorkNet website within 48 hours. I will put the link to the presentation recording in the chat momentarily. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar will be offering closed captioning, which you should be able to see on your screen right now. At the end of the webinar and tomorrow, each attendee will receive a follow-up email, which will include a survey asking you about the webinar. Please provide feedback and any suggestions you have to help improve our webinars. A reminder that if you have a faulty internet connection or would prefer to call in, you can do so by calling into this webinar by using the phone number in your original registration email. With that, we're going to get started, and I have just a couple of polls to get us started. So the first poll I am going to launch asks about where your local area is and what partner you represent. We're actually going to start with the which partner do you represent question first. And we'll give about 10 more seconds to respond to the poll. Okay, great. So as you can see, we have a variety of partners present here, quite a few from Title I, and then from other WIOA partners and stakeholders. So welcome, we're so glad you're here. And then I have one more poll question for you that I'm going to launch. And that question is, what is your local area? I'll give another 10 more seconds for responses. All right, so we have quite a broad variety, which is great. We have folks from Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central Illinois, and Southern Illinois, with it looks like the biggest representation today being from Central Illinois. So welcome to all, and we're so glad you're here. And with this, I'd love to turn it over to our presenter for today, Carissa Melody.
Molly, thank you so much. And I do too. I love seeing the variety of people from different parts of our state. I'm going to talk today about the ATTA project, but I just want to say we at ATTA, for this project, we have a hard time reaching Southern Illinois. So if you see anything here that you feel like you want to share with friends and coworkers, please share out because we definitely want to reach everyone across the state with this project. So let me take just a moment to introduce myself. My name is Carissa Melody. I have been with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Development since October of 2020. Most of my work at ICSPS is on the ATTA project, which I'll tell you about next. Personally, I have 10 years experience teaching special education in very structured life skills classrooms where about 90% of my students were on the autism spectrum and nonverbal. I also have a master's degree in applied behavior analysis. Next slide, please. So ATTA, the Autism Training and Technical Assistance Project, is brought to you by ICSPS through a grant from the Illinois State Board of Education. ATTA creates resources and provides professional development designed to assist individuals with autism spectrum disorder in the transition process, including transition to meaningful employment. The project also offers live webinars like this one with a different theme each month, supporting those involved in the transition process, including the young adult with autism, educators or job coaches, employers, families, and the community. Next slide, please. So today we'll talk about autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, and I'll use these terms interchangeably. And just so happens that April is recognized as Autism Awareness Month, which we'll talk about some of the characteristics that accompany an autism diagnosis, the benefits of hiring someone with ASD, and ATTA specific resources and strategies for the getting a job and keeping a job process. This webinar is meant to be a broad overview of autism as it relates to employment and employment barriers. I'll also speak broadly about autism encompassing the whole spectrum, both those on the higher functioning end and those with more severe barriers, but still all very capable of working in employment programs or supported employment with a job coach. Next slide, please. So here's some famous faces you probably recognized who have disclosed publicly that they have autism. I'm sure you can think of so many others who have discovered their unique interests and talents to find satisfying and meaningful careers. It's leaders like these that are helping to raise awareness and acceptance for autism and show us that employment is possible in a wide variety of career fields. Next slide, please. Well, let's look at just a few statistics and facts about ASD. It is first a developmental disability, neurology-based condition that can cause significant social, communication, and behavioral challenges. Often there's nothing about how people look with ASD that sets them apart, but they could communicate, interact, behave, or learn in ways that are different. The learning, thinking, and problem-solving abilities of people with autism can range from very gifted to severely challenged. It's a broad spectrum. So low and high functioning autism differences are determined mostly by IQ ranges, which sometimes is really hard to get accurately, but the prevalence rate keeps rising as we get better at assessing autism. So currently the CDC recognizes that 1 in 54 children have been identified with ASD. It occurs in every racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic group. It's 4 times more common in boys than girls. Some feel like this is because girls could mask or manage to hide it a little better than boys, but these are the statistics. So next slide, please. So we are talking about autism today, and we're not going to get hung up on terminology, but I'm also going to use the term neurodiverse or neurodiversity. It definitely seems to be the new coined term everyone's using when talking about disabilities. But I just wanted to be clear that this is a very broad term that encompasses all the neurological differences of the human brain. It does describe the brain of someone with autism, but also with ADHD, maybe Tourette's syndrome, speech conditions like dyscalculia or dyspraxia, some intellectual disabilities, epilepsy, and mental health diagnoses. If we lump autism into this broad category of neurodiversity and think of hiring practices for neurodiverse individuals, then we are thinking of 1 in 4 or 25% of all Americans are neurodiverse. When a person is diagnosed with autism, there are many times that this isn't the only diagnosis. In fact, 70% of individuals with autism have other diagnoses like autism and ADHD or autism and anxiety are very common. Autism is in a category on its own. When you put it in a category on its own, it's the disability with the lowest employment rate. Studies are showing that up to 85% are unemployed, are underemployed, and 79% of those employed are only working part-time. And they're only 58% of all individuals with ASD do any kind of work after they graduate high school. These numbers might not include those on the higher functioning end, depending on whether or not they've disclosed their autism to the employer or not. So next slide, please. The ATTA project is continually developing resources that we feel can make life easier for all of our stakeholders. Today, I'll talk about a handful of the resources as they relate to employment. This one, under the employer section on our ATTA website, is why should I hire someone with ASD? It talks about 10 characteristics that are common with an autism diagnosis that a successful employee might possess. These traits can be applied to so many kinds of jobs. Overall, individuals with ASD are very black and white thinkers, and so they take details like job duties, arrival, departure times very seriously with a strong level of commitment, honesty, and integrity. Their memories are exceptional. They've been praised for accuracy and finding minor faults leading to huge advances with companies. Individuals with ASD have a broad range of skills. You'll find them in computer science research. I showed you famous people in entertainment and sports. They have strong visual skills leading to some creative solutions and oftentimes a different way to look at situations than a neurotypical individual might. Their problem-solving skills tend to be logical and structured. Maybe could have a different approach than others, but it can also lead to new ideas or a fresh perspective. Individuals with ASD don't necessarily seek out socializing or give in to social pressures. They're rigid rule followers and stick to their work tasks with integrity. They seem to have an ability to focus on rote tasks or long list of repetitive tasks better than neurotypical peers that could maybe find these tasks boring or monotonous. When they're properly matched with jobs that they are interested in, they are hyper-focused on those tasks, which can lead to productivity for companies. They tend to stick with jobs for the long haul. Studies have actually shown that individuals with ASD are more dependable, and employers are noting a significantly less turnover rate that is really saving some cost and hiring and training new employees. All employees benefit from supports or accommodations that are put into place to assist individuals with ASD, and I'll talk more specifically about accommodations later. So the next slide, Molly, is just, I love this visual just showing more strengths that tend to accompany individuals with autism. Autism Speaks and the University of Leeds have put out this visual, and I just really like all the strengths that it shows. Next slide, please. So we have all these great characteristics a person with autism might possess, but there's still that 85% who are unemployed or underemployed. Why is this? Just some speculation. Some people think that maybe assumptions are made about individuals with autism when they don't know they have autism. They might be like, ooh, that person isn't genuine. They're evasive, arrogant, challenging. They sound like a know-it-all, inflexible, controlling, rude, overreacting, oversensitive, self-centered, challenging. I feel like some people talk about that they're maybe incapable of networking, or they can't really maneuver workplace politics just because of that lack of social skills. And they are very honest and don't maybe have a filter. Maybe some interpret this as being rude or blunt or challenging. Do you know someone like this? I feel like my teenagers could say that I'm like this sometimes. But the truth is, autistic individuals do not wish or purposely set out to be obstinate. They just don't know how to present themselves sometimes, or they're lacking the communication or social skills needed in certain situations. These skills that neurotypical individuals typically learn naturally by just being perceptive to what others do. An individual with autism is very self-focused, locked in their own world, and most of the time just cannot see things from other people's perspectives. They're missing out on those little social cues and have a hard time developing social skills naturally. They don't really know how to share their skills, what degree to share them. They maybe can talk too much, elaborate too much. They could also appear to be insecure or withdrawn. And they might be a match when looking at jobs. They might be a match for most of the job skills, but not every skill on that list, which could be a deterrent to them even applying for the job. Like, well, that's not me, right? I only match with some of the skills, not all the skills, just very rigid, black and white thinkers. So next slide, please. So real quick, I just want to show the disability employment statistics the U.S. Department of Labor put out. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. So looking at this chart over the last 10 years, things got better. I mean, from 2009 to 2019, the unemployment rate was cut in half. So as we're becoming more aware that individuals with disabilities have really good job skills and our society is becoming so accepting of individuals with disabilities, these numbers just keep improving. Plus, all of you on this call with WIOA who have a hand directly in bridging the employment gap by accepting and encouraging and educating individuals with disabilities in community colleges, supported employment programs, searching and training for jobs. I mean, give yourself a hand because these numbers are really great. So next slide, please. Then 2020 happened, right? And the US Department of Labor released this statistic showing that the percentage of the population with disability decreased by 2%. But of course, we're experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is a direct reflection of how this pandemic has impacted our economy. So we're going to get there. We'll get back to bringing that, percentage down. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the law. I'm not, definitely not an expert about the laws and the fine print that go with them. I know they all share the same fundamental goals, right? We just want to remove the barriers to employment that are faced individuals with disabilities face. So the ADA just celebrated 30 years in 2020, and they prohibit discrimination with people with disabilities and guarantee equal opportunity. They authorize funding for vocational rehab, independent living, training, research. Of course, the first four titles of WIOA directly relate to workforce law and helping individuals manage barriers to employment, obtain and keep jobs. And there's programs that help employers hire and retain workers. We just need to work on getting more individuals with disabilities and specifically with autism, because that's my focus, get hired and get their foot in the door. Next slide, please. The only way to really know for sure if someone is autistic is if they self-disclose. But self-disclosure is so personal. It can lead to vulnerability and discrimination. Again, there's nothing about a way a person looks, right, to tell you that they're on the spectrum. You might notice that a person is avoiding eye contact, or their eye contact's a little abnormal, maybe just staring for long periods of time. Their facial expressions might not match the situation. They don't initiate or respond to greetings right away. Their voice inflection could be all over the place. They just could be very loud or very soft, use a sing-songy or robotic kind of voice. They might not be able to hide some of those stereotypical behaviors like hand flapping or body rocking. But self-disclosure is the best way, and it's sometimes the only legal way to ensure individuals get the supports and accommodations they need to perform a job task just as well as or even better than their peers. So we have another great ATTA resource on our website about disclosure, which really helps someone go through the pros and cons of disclosure and decide if they should or when the best time is to disclose. A couple other disclosure documents that I really like are the ODEP page has a good disclosure document, and Next for Autism has a great disclosure document, and I really like actually all of Next for Autism's resources too. But additionally, here's just a few tips for employers. Since 25% of all Americans are considered neurodiverse, just include a self-identification form as part of hiring or the yearly update or personal information forms that you ask people to do every year. Be sure to communicate that all employees, the purpose of self-identifying and the advantages to self-identify, and using examples of how self-disclosure and accommodations have led to specific employee success in the company. And always highlight neurodiverse leaders who have disclosed and are just high up in this leadership position. So next slide, please. So we're going to get into a little detail about these big picture barriers, such as communication, social interaction, sensory sensitivity, and behavioral barriers like the repetitive movement and impulsivity. Most of these barriers can be managed and the employment gap can be bridged just using universal design. The strategy for making products, environments, operational system, and services welcoming and usable for the most diverse range of people possible. Whether we realize it or not, most of us benefit from universal design workplaces on a daily basis. Next slide, please. So just some considerations when looking at these big picture barriers as they apply to the application and interview process. Most applicants start with job fairs, online applications, even more now, right? With the reduction of face-to-face interactions. The online tools should be accessible by everyone with equal opportunity. Sometimes this online application process comes with a questionnaire to weed out applicants, which they're kind of trying to get rid of legally. But multiple choice answers can be similar or tricky, or maybe have some confusing language. Also, remember, an individual with autism would most likely choose the option that's blunt and straightforward, but this option could be included in the answer because it's the most rude response, right? So the applicant wouldn't even get through this application process because of these tricky answers. And this can be applied in the interview also. Best practices include avoiding vague questions or like the trendy pop psychology, like if you could be any animal, what would you be and why? It's just, some of those questions are just kind of bewildering to us and we just have never thought about it. So especially to someone in the autism spectrum. Also, group interviews could cause a little anxiety, even for neurotypical individuals, where you just don't know where to look or where the next question is coming from. And if eye contact is not a necessary part of doing the job well, then does it need to be a factor in hiring or not hiring an individual? So just something to think about. Next slide, please. I want to highlight a couple more documents created by ATTA. The interviewing tips document just gives some tips and what to do before, during, and after the interview. And then there's a tips assessment tool where an individual can go through this assessment to see maybe where they need the most help in the interview process. And there's plenty of space in these documents to write some notes for reflection. And here's also some strategies or accommodations that go with the application and interview, like getting assistance. If there's a tricky online questionnaire, you could request fewer interviewees or the first interview be over the phone, which most of them are nowadays, right? And then ask for the questions in advance. Most companies have standard list of questions that they ask all applicants and they're just happy to send them out. Sure, here it is, prepare. And prepare your like 20 to 30-second pitch about you so that it doesn't get too wordy and it's focused on work skills and the benefits that you can bring to the company. You can ask for a certain time of day to interview. And the best practice of all, if the skills match, but they just really cannot get these interview skills down pat, then the employee could do a trial of the applicant's skills or set up like a mock job situation and see if they have the skills to perform the job and just take that, very anxiety-ridden interview right out of the process. Next slide, please. Same, just best practices specific to the hiring and training process. Of course, these are great with individuals with autism, but they really can help with all employees. The orientation or any other informational type meetings should be informative short sessions and built-in breaks. Expectations need to be very clear. Maybe have some checklist on what paperwork you need to turn in or safety information, and have some scenarios with that information, like a safety scenario. The dress code and hygiene needs to be specific. Performance indicators for job duties should be measurable. Are there prerequisite skills to this job? Does it require working with others or alone? Include a procedure for asking questions, break times, who should the employee reach out to? If they're overwhelmed, do they have a mentor? Direct and regular feedback should be given privately, not in front of a group. Feedback needs to be specific, not broad, showing what's working well, what can be improved, and maybe have it both verbally and in writing, just because those processing skills verbally are not quite as fast as maybe a neurotypical individual. Having a mentor and building a good relationship and giving time for them to build this relationship really helps, because when an employee with autism feels comfortable reaching out to their mentor to ask for help, you can really, try to stop maybe some of those barriers or feelings of when you get out of control. So Autonomy Works, it's a company that we've highlighted in Downers Grove that we've worked with, and founded by a father of a boy on the autism spectrum, just to hire individuals with autism. And they recommend the show me, guide me, support me model, which is just really good practice when learning any new skill for anyone. So first you show the employee what to do. Next, you guide them through the process while talking and showing. And then last, the support me is just watching the employee do it and do all the steps on their own. So this is definitely best practice for all. Employees with autism need to be included in all team building activities, and autism characteristic considerations should be considered when planning. And the best way to ensure that activities are planned with autism in mind is to maybe include individuals with autism on the planning committee. All staff should be trained on inclusion in an effort to become a solid workforce with no barriers. So looking at these best practices, do you feel like your local workforce innovation area trainings work well with this population? Are there things that can be tweaked? I mean, I've definitely been on the website and there are some really great trainings out there that you guys have put out and have access to. So I'll talk about that later. Next slide, please. So here's a glimpse at our ATTA work environment assessment. This, I feel like, is such a great tool, not only for the job seeker, but also it can help the employer or job coach to assess the environment for potential barriers and universally design an environment that works best for everyone. It's a thorough document helping take into consideration barriers such as noise level, smells, textures, lighting, social navigation, job tasks, physical requirements, and work hours. Next slide, please. So when considering the work environment an individual works best in, they should have a really good sense of themselves. Self-awareness, knowing your needs, limitations, and values is key to the ability to advocate for themselves and speak up for their needs. So if a person doesn't know where their challenges lie, they won't know what to ask for, right? Once they know their personal challenges with communication, social skills, or body regulation, they can become a better worker. Recognizing their stress triggers, taking a break before they reach the point of dysregulation is a huge asset. If they work best in a quiet space with headphones, different lighting, ask for it. If they need a task list, ask for it. Right? Set up the workspace to personally promote their best work. And be clear. Use specific statements like, I work best when I have clear instructions, or I work best when I wear headphones to block out the background noise. So next slide, we're going to launch a poll. We're going to talk about accommodations. So I just want to launch a quick poll just to see if there's any accommodations that you use. Awesome. Yes, most of us are using our calendar or schedule or an alarm clock to wake up. Most of us don't wake up naturally early. So next slide, please. So we can all agree that we use accommodations, and there's great resources regarding workplace accommodations. DOL.gov, they've got a great list. At Illinois WorkNet, your site has a great list. And JAN, the Job Accommodation Network, are all great for both employers and employees to get some basic list of accommodations. So next slide, please. So when every aspect of a business is viewed through the lens of a universally designed workplace, then employee attraction and retention can be improved, right? So the next few slides, I'm just going to show you some examples of visuals that are already in place and applied in areas related to products, services, the physical environment, communication, technology. And when a specific accommodation is required, many times it costs nothing or very little money at all. It could just be an adjustment in the work hours or like a time specific schedule, like the one shown in the middle here with planned break times. Oh, next slide, please. Here's some examples of accommodations or universal design strategies that most of us use. Ramps are not just for wheelchairs. They're used by parents with strollers, employees with wheeled work bags, carts full of equipment. Closed captioning. I keep closed captioning on my TV at home because I have dogs that bark or kids. Remember, I said I have teenagers and they're boys. So they get loud. So I just keep the closed captioning on my TV at home. My kids have actually used it with Spanish captions to help them learn the language for school. Numbering or labeling shelving or work materials help with faster stocking and retrieval of products for everyone. A place for everything, everything in its place. This bottom middle one shows equipment in a factory cleaning supplies that are labeled, and there's a little shadow with the words that say, you know, what goes there. It kind of holds the place for that item. How about the mask required visual? We all know too well. Visuals like these help make the rules clear to readers, non-readers, anybody who may not know the language. These are all done in English, but you see that picture and you know that you need to wear your mask, right? Next slide, please. We use visuals with picture reminders for medical emergency, construction sites, lockout equipment. I'm sure you can think of so many more. And if you have a large population of workers that speak a different language, signs can be done in Spanish or any other language. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of task lists and instructions written out for assembling equipment, entering expenses, office checklists, cleaning checklists, safe work procedures. Most of us have used flowcharts, spreadsheets. These are all great visuals that are already in place in our work environment. Nothing special. Next slide, please. They've already talked about most of these, but here's a list of more best practices to support neurodiversity company-wide. If they strive for universal design, the rest of this list is pretty much covered. State their commitment to inclusion in writing, show neurodiverse individuals and company advertisements, state the willingness to provide individual accommodations, reduce the stigma around neurodiversity, and help make the staff feel empowered to disclose. Rewrite the job descriptions to be more literal descriptions of the job, like try not to use cutesy wording like we're looking for a strategy ninja. Make some flexible workspaces, allow headphones, darker spaces, alternate lighting, allow movement, breaks, maybe a calming sensory break room. Include neurodiverse employees on committees and groups when making decisions, create partnerships with school job programs, which you guys already do. Partner with autism groups to make determinations on best practices. And like I said, many of you are already partnered with employers and support the employee directly. WIOA programs already offer job counseling training and sheltered work options for disability and autism inclusion. So you're there. Next slide, please. Here's some things that some of the companies known for autism inclusion are saying about the hiring perks. SAP is a Japanese software company that's worldwide, known for their Autism at Work program. And they reported that a neurodiverse team found a glitch, fixed it, and saved the company $40 million. Companies such as Accenture that incorporate neurodiverse individuals report 28% of their revenues are higher now. They have over 2,500 employees who have disclosed their disability, which is 4.5% of their workforce. Ernst & Young is an accounting firm. They state on their website, they're finding that people with autism approach problems differently and that their logical, straightforward thinking can spur process improvements that greatly increase productivity. There's so many companies like Ford, JP Morgan Chase, Freddie Mac, Microsoft that have more autism hiring programs. Personally, I love shopping at and actually seek out stores where I can see employees with disabilities are working with smiles on their faces. I get to see this at my local grocery store, coffee shop, restaurants that I frequent. This happens with businesses too. The customers feel really good about working with companies who hire neurodiverse individuals. The employees benefit from working in this environment where different minds solve different problems better and faster, right? When you get all types of brains working together, you can solve problems better. I've heard Temple Grandin speak several times and her message is always very similar. She says there's 3 different types of minds: visual thinkers, mathematical or pattern thinkers, and verbal thinkers, and that these different types of minds complement each other and are all necessary for different types of job skills. So when a company really looks at the skills required to do a job and the skills of the applicants instead of just who interviews well, they might discover that the best applicant is the neurodiverse, loyal, trusting employee. If the employee on the autism spectrum, they'll come with intense focus when the job is based on their interest, and the employee will be a creative problem solver. They'll create a brand of diversity and inclusion, which will positively impact all the other employees and their neurotypical coworkers and customers that they serve. Next slide, please. So other company considerations, just is the company looking to assess their diversity practices? So is there a place for diversity? Is inclusion modeled top down? Does a company break autism stereotypes? Is there room for advancement? Do we have inclusion outside of sheltered workshops? Are people being paid fairly? So this one, I'm so glad to see that good news with this Fair Labor Standard Act, this 14C provision, which has been around since the Great Depression, allowing people to be paid sub-minimum wage, is they just made put in a bipartisan bill this month, the Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment Act, just got introduced to the House of Representatives, that would halt the issuance of these certificates immediately and require workers to be paid minimum wage within the next 5 years. So the more companies that get on board and changing their language, including diversity, the faster we're going to be able to close this gap on the employment disparity. Next slide, please. So this is just some thoughts on where we think the future of employment should be. I really think these trends have already started. I mean, autism is becoming more and more accepted. Employers are seeking the hiring benefits and changing their practices. When thinking about the future of employment, we're going to see more neurodiverse leaders embracing their differences and coming forward to tell everyone, this is what makes me unique, and this is how I used my unique skills to get to the top. Inclusion language will be used on all the forms: hiring, recruiting. Autism at Work programs are awesome, but they still single out autism and the hiring, the disability label more, not necessarily hiring for the skills required, even though we're finding that there's so many great skills possessed by people on the spectrum. But the people need to be aligned with their strengths regardless of their label, and accommodations should always be considered if needed. So next slide, please. So here's just a concise look at all the ATTA resources I felt matched today's topic pretty well. Our website like I said, we reach all these stakeholders, we create resources for all these stakeholders. It is full of what I feel are great resources that are helpful to all these important stakeholders. In bold are the documents that I highlighted today, and then I just listed a few more. The new one, the looking for a job checklist, I think Molly's putting that handout in the chat because it's not quite on the website yet. We have a few that I've been working on that'll be on the website soon. The social skills assessment assesses their social communication skills in the workplace, really helps an individual find their strengths and challenges. And then there's also a job description template, which is a good tool for the employer or even, you know, maybe a job coach. When looking at the job, you can fill out the different portions of the job description. So next slide just has some great websites, including some of the ones I mentioned so far. Autonomy Works, Illinois WorkNet, Next for Autism, Autism Workforce Strategies, Freddie Mac's Neurodiversity Hiring Commitment. And then the next slide, again, some great resources with helpful information for both the employer and employee on job accommodations, assistance for the job seeker, vocational rehab services and trainings. Of course, Illinois WorkNet Disability Works page has awesome videos. Taking a look at our programs and training while keeping in mind that 25% of the entire population is neurodiverse is going to be so helpful. So let's continue to help get more individuals hired. So the next slide, I want to read this picture because it really sums up autism. Just says autism is challenging and rewarding, innovation, complex and lifelong, overcoming barriers every day, untapped skills, talent, and potential, more than Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man, invisible and misunderstood, an eye opener, seeing the world differently. So now it's time to wrap up and answer any questions you might have from today's presentation. So next slide is just thank you for attending. It has our direct website on there, my information on there if you want to email me directly. If anyone has any questions or thoughts, I would love to hear from you.
Carissa, I'm looking in the Q&A as well as the chat, and I do not see any questions at this point. So if anyone has questions, now would be a great time if you want to post those in the chat or the Q&A.
All right, I love this awkward silence. So thank you so much to WIOA, all the different parts that y'all on this call represent today, the American Job Center. You guys are doing just awesome things in, you know, the realm of disability. I just hope to bring a little bit more specifically about autism to you today. So thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure. I hope that you were able to get something out of today's talk.
Well, Carissa, we did actually get one question.
Oh, great.
Just now, we got one. Darcy asked, we don't get any referrals for people on the spectrum. How do we seek out people to help them?
Wow, I don't know. I mean, I know that they're included in the disability language that you put out. So I feel like, you know, that's maybe my job or high schools, when high schools are looking at, you know, placing kids and utilizing your resources, then, you know, hopefully they're recommending everyone with disabilities, including those on the autism spectrum. So yeah, Darcy, I don't know. That is a great question. I hope that we can reach more. So maybe that means that they are working and we're reaching them, but the statistics show differently.
Okay, perfect. Well, I just want to thank you, like Chris has said, for attending the webinar. And as stated earlier, I'm going to put the link to the survey for this webinar in the chat now. So if you want to complete it while it's fresh in your mind, please feel free to do so. If not, you'll receive an email, a follow-up email with that survey link. And don't forget that the recording will be on the website I posted above, as well as on Illinois WorkNet. And as I, mentioned, the survey link is in the chat. And then I did just notice in the Q&A, we did actually get an additional question, Carissa. So Michelle noted that some people with autism find job applications with situational assessment questions quite difficult. What is recommended to assist a person with autism while completing the question items on these job applications? And what accommodations could an employer make?
Well, again, I feel like, some of those could be just a little tricky with the questions and the answers just because of their just lack of social skills, just not knowing what would be the right answer when so many answers are similar. And then also processing time. I feel like a lot of kids, they are not reading and comprehending what they read themselves. And so if they have someone side by side reading aloud, the question and answers is really helpful, and just really stopping and letting them process and talk through the answers before they're answering. Like, what do you think would be the right answer? And why do you think it would be the right answer? And just taking that time to really explain the best answers so that they can help see different perspectives and why this is the right answer. Because like I said, so many are just lacking that social skills piece. They're just not learning naturally. So that'd be great if they had someone sit down with them to go through that with them.
Okay, perfect. Are there any other questions? All right, Carissa. Well, I think those were the questions that we had. The survey link is in the chat. Is there anything you'd like to add before we finish it up?
No, that's all. Thank you so much. Thanks, Molly.
Yep. I hope everyone has a great day.
Yep, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.